Hey, peace, everyone. Thanks for being here. Buona deal.
Recognize royalty, recognize it, recognize royalty, gotta recognize it, recognize royalty, like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty. I can feel, recognize royalty, I can see, recognize royalty, now I recognize royalty, royalty, I can see, recognize royalty, I can love, recognize royalty, now I recognize it. I recognize passion. Never just the man with the title in his hand, with the vital in his hand, with the Bible in his hand. You never just the man with the scepter and demand, with the lecture and the stand, with the vector and the candle. Can you understand the grand from the texture of the hand? Hard at work, are you hard at work? Working with the man, it's the ring of royalty. Crown him king, just a thing, letting loyalty ring. Bring frankincense and myrrh and other things. It's gold already blings from the highest that prizes no sins. Recognize the king's overruling commandments with the Trinity and the power it brings when you recognize royalty. I feel it. Yeah, I see it. I recognize now. Royalty. I see it. Now I'm in love now. I recognize your passion. Recognize royalty.
Yeah, what's good, peoples? Blessings. Thanks for showing up. This is my first video. You know what I mean? I'm feeling good about it. I'm feeling blessed. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Let's get right into it. The title of the video is Disco Fever. And we're gonna try and go through a short history of hip hop. And you know, we're just trying to really determine who created hip hop. Is hip hop a Black culture? Is hip hop a Latino culture? Is it a Caribbean culture? Is it an accumulation of all of them? So just who created hip hop? You know, and this video is inspired by, you know, just the talk of the town, which is, you know, Black people and FBA, you know, claiming to be, you know, the innovators of everything. In this case, it's just you know, hip hop. We've been through, you know, everything else. Now it's time for us to talk about who created hip hop. Black Americans feel that, you know, they are the originators. You know, they say when it comes to reggae is just a variation of their music, because, you know, they just took R&B and we're just copying Black music. You know, and the same thing with dancehall, reggaeton, Afro beats. All of these, they claim to just be knockoffs of their music, of R&B and hip hop. And so we're just trying to figure out, how does that argument really hold up? And so, you know, we're going to go to our good friend Wiki to see how it holds up. You know, let's see what we can see when we go to Wiki. And since we are starting off our history of hip hop, we're going to start with just hip hop and just read and see what it says about the history of hip hop. And again, the goal is to see who really created hip hop. So it says hip hop, formerly known as disco rap, disco rap. Hip hop is formerly known as disco rap. So does that answer the question? Hip hop is disco. I think the answer is right there in terms of who created hip hop. I think the answer is, you know, whoever created disco. So, you know, and I think I mean, I could be wrong, but I think disco is white people music. I'm pretty sure of that. You know, all the disco I know, or most of the disco I know, is white people music. You know, I'm Jamaican. We listen to disco too. Even to today, you go to parties, we still playing disco music. You know what I'm saying? So you know, we know that that's white people stuff. So you know, looks as if the show is over. White people created hip hop. If hip hop is formerly disco rap. No, too easy. You know, if we can't agree that disco is white people music, we should definitely be able to agree that disco culture is white people culture, right? I think that disco as a genre or as a culture was created by white people. I think white people made disco popular. And so that's why I would say disco is white people music. You know what I'm saying? They're with that LGBTQ lifestyle. I think, you know, even the LGBTQ lifestyle is what made disco popular. Right. So even though most of the artists may have been Black artists, and, you know, disco may have come out of Black music, you know, we'll look further into that and see where that takes us. But at least it should be fair to say that disco culture is white people culture, and that hip hop culture, as a product of disco culture, then hip hop culture is also white people culture. Or we at least have to say that white people have a stake in hip hop as well, through disco, because that's their culture. All right, so that's an interesting first statement. Hip hop is formerly known as disco rap. So I wonder why hip hop was known as disco rap. You know, that's the first question. That's the first question that I'm interested in, is why was hip hop called disco rap? And I'm just going to go to ChatGPT and ask that question and see what it says. Hip hop was formerly known as disco rap during its early years because it emerged from the cultural and musical environment of the disco era in the 1970s, particularly in the Bronx, New York. Here's why the term disco rap was used and how it reflects hip-hop's origins. 1. Connection to disco beats. Sampling disco tracks. Early hip-hop DJs like DJ Kool Herc, Grandmaster Flash, and Africa Bambaataa often used their disco records in their sets. They isolated and extended the instrumental breaks of these tracks, which had strong rhythms and funky grooves, to create the break beats that formed the foundation of early hip hop. All right, so I think we've kind of, you know, cracked the nutshell in episode 1. The foundations of hip hop are built on disco. It was disco rap, and you know, the DJs, it was built around dancing and dancing to disco music. You know, and that makes kind of makes proper sense, I guess. So the next section is, again, we're talking about the connection to disco beats with hip hop. The next thing is dance floor influence. Disco's infectious beats and rhythms were perfect for dancing, and hip hop evolved in the same party atmosphere where music was meant to get people moving. So again, it seems kind of apparent that hip hop culture evolved out of disco culture. It's that whole disco dance culture. And, you know, given that disco was the rave of the 70s, you know, we can say that that's the main music that was being played at those parties. So this just kind of all falls into place. Next influence was instrumentation and style. Similar sound equipment. Early hip-hop heavily relied on the same equipment used by disco DJs, such as turntables, mixers, and sound systems to manipulate tracks and create a seamless party experience. Yes, I think ChatGPT is on to something here. This again makes perfect sense. The whole setup of hip hop, of the origins of hip hop, the DJ turntables, the mixing, the beat breaking, like all of that is centered around disco. Another influence was the funky and rhythmic elements. It says many early rap songs, like the Sugar Hill Gang's 1979 hit Rapper's Delight, borrowed directly from hip-hop, from disco tracks. For instance, Rapper's Delight famously sampled Chic's disco classic, Good Times. And you know, Rapper's Delight is kind of like the anthem of hip-hop, if you will, or the anthem of original hip-hop, is that Rapper's Delight song. But let's continue. Terminology and transition. This is the next influence. And I think it's going to get a little juicy for us. So the next thing is disco's influence on hip-hop's origins. Since hip-hop started to develop during disco's peak, early rap was often seen as a subgenre of disco. Wow. That's something. That's telling right there. Early rap was often seen as a subgenre of disco. So hip hop and rap is the child of disco. And then hip hop is the child of rap. But, you know, disco is really where it's all coming out of. This is all coming out of disco culture. And it says, this is why early hip-hop songs were often referred to as disco rap, before hip-hop became recognized as a distinct cultural movement and music genre. So again, hip-hop was quite obviously an outgrowth of the disco movement. Goes on to say, MCs and DJs at disco events. Many early hip-hop performances occurred at disco-themed parties, clubs, and events. MCs or rappers began as hype men for DJs at these parties, adding rhythmic spoken words over disco beats, which evolved into rap as a standalone art form. Yes, I think we found the culprit, ladies and gentlemen. Disco is the progenitor of hip-hop. Hip-hop is directly related, is the child of disco. That seems pretty obvious to me at this point. But you know, again, it's still just episode 1, so there's still a lot to talk about and a lot to look at, a lot of questions to ask. But at this point, this seems pretty evident. I think this is the last thing. Now it talks about the breakaway and why disco, hip-hop kind of broke away from disco. So let's hear what it says. It says, the decline of disco. As disco's popularity declined in the late 1970s and early 1980s, hip-hop started to differentiate itself, incorporating more elements of funk, soul, and electronic music. So the funk, soul, R&B, electronic music even. Electronic music is that electric boogaloo type music that they dance to in those breakdancing movies. That type of electronic stuff, which also, you know, had a great, played a great role in hip hop culture. But I would agree that all of these things, soul music, funk, if the blues had anything to do with it, all of those things came after the disco era and after disco and after hip hop and rap in particular was already cemented in disco music. So again, let me read that again. As disco's popularity declined in the late 70s and early 80s, hip hop started to differentiate itself, incorporating more elements of funk, soul, and electronic music. Artists and fans sought to establish hip hop as a distinct genre and culture, moving away from the disco rap label. Cultural identity. Hip hop began to represent the experiences, struggles, and stories of urban youth, especially Black and Latino communities. This gave it a more grounded and socially conscious identity, distinct from disco's association with nightlife and escapism. Yeah, so apparently disco had a bad rap. Disco had a bad rap. Get it? Disco had a bad rap and it became hip hop. That's funny. It may be a bar, but we'll just say it's a funny line for now. So in summary, says ChatGPT, hip hop was initially called disco rap because of its reliance on disco beats, instrumentation, and party culture during its formative years. As the genre grew and developed its own identity, it shed the disco rap label and became recognized as a unique cultural movement that reflected the realities and creativity of urban life. Yep. So pretty much the same way a butterfly was once a caterpillar, goes from being a caterpillar and evolves into a butterfly. Hip hop evolved from disco. Disco is the caterpillar from which the butterfly called hip hop evolved or came into being. But you cannot have hip hop without disco. Next thing I want to ask ChatGPT is, how did disco culture shape the foundation of hip hop? And I presume that it may repeat itself based on what it already gave us to the first question we asked. But let's see what it says. Because this is important, since it is the history of hip hop. I think it's important for us to take our time and look at the influence that disco rap had, or that disco had on, the growth of hip hop. So again, if it sounds repetitive, bear with me, because this is all good information, I think. It says disco culture played a significant role in shaping the foundation of hip hop, particularly during the genre's early development in the Bronx during the 1970s. Here's how disco influenced hip hop. The role of DJs, techniques, and equipment. Disco DJs pioneered the use of turntables, mixers, and sound systems to create seamless transitions between tracks. This inspired early hip-hop DJs like DJ Kool Herc to develop techniques such as beat matching, mixing, and scratching. Breakbeats. DJs like Kool Herc expanded on disco's rhythm-driven breaks by isolating and extending them to create breakbeats, the foundation for breakdancing and MCing in hip hop. So we find the foundation for dancing, scratching or breakbeats, the foundation for breakdancing, MCing. All of that is wrapped up in disco. Disco clubs and spaces, the party scene. So again, this is all how did disco lay the foundation for hip hop. Disco culture revolved around vibrant dance parties and clubs, fostering a communal atmosphere. Early hip hop emerged in a similar setting at block parties and house gatherings where DJs played disco records to entertain crowds. So hip hop is just disco in the streets, but it's disco parties in the park. But again, it's still all centered around disco. Sound systems. Inspired by disco's powerful sound systems, hip-hop pioneers like Africa Bambaataa and Grandmaster Flash used large sound systems to amplify their music, creating a party atmosphere in outdoor spaces. Yeah, it's just a disco party outside. Music sampling. Disco tracks. Early hip-hop heavily sampled disco for their catchy rhythms and funky bass lines. And again, it talks about Chic's Good Times for rappers' delight. Dance culture. Breaking and freestyling. Disco encouraged self-expression through dance. This ethos carried over to hip-hop, where breakdancing became a core element. Breakers or b-boys and b-girls often dance during the extended break beats spun by DJs, creating a unique style. Community and inclusion. And again, this is all how disco is laying the foundation for hip-hop. And this one I think is pretty important. It says, disco served as a cultural melting pot. Disco culture brought together people of diverse backgrounds, particularly in LGBTQ+, Black and Latino communities. Similarly, hip-hop emerged as an inclusive, community-driven culture that united underprivileged youth through music, art, and dance. So the same impetus that drove hip-hop or that drove disco into existence, just that urge to bring kind of what they saw as underrepresented or marginalized groups together. That's what made disco famous. People will say disco is gay people music, and I think ChatGPT is referring to that by mentioning LGBTQ+, and that disco was one of those venues. Disco clubs is one of those venues that, LGBTQ+ people took advantage of, and just found to be places of, it's just where they hung out, for lack of a better way of saying it. But I think that what this is showing is that, LGBTQ+ and can also be seen as part of the foundation of hip hop as well. Certainly as disco is, if disco is a part of the foundation, then, homosexuality has to also be a part of the foundation of hip hop. And I think given, what we know about, P. Diddy, Africa Bambaataa, the allegations against him, and again, this is all alleged stuff. Given what we know about that and everything else about, hip hop, we know that there's a lot of homosexuality in hip hop. We know that as well. And so it's no surprise that there is an LGBTQ pillar of hip hop as well. And I think that has to be also acknowledged. Next is fashion and style. Disco's flashy, bold outfits and emphasis on individuality influenced early hip hop fashion. And again, the flashy stuff, I think that's also part of the LGBTQ plus community and their identity is the way they dressed. It was very flashy, you know, regardless of that. Just the dress was a part of hip hop's influence. The way disco people dressed going to these discotheques, the way they dressed for dancing, all of that was a part of the culture that was adapted by hip hop. The vibrant colors, funky hairstyles, expressive clothing helped shape hip hop's unique aesthetic. And again, it's going to go from the transition from disco to hip hop. Again, if it's repetitive, please pardon. But I think it's worth the read. By the late 1970s, as disco declined and faced backlash, for example, Disco Demolition Night, hip hop grew as a cultural movement. Many DJs and producers from the disco era transitioned into hip hop, carrying over their techniques, musical elements, and event styles. So, you know, it's just reiterating what it said earlier about, you know, people moving away from disco because disco developed a bad rap. And so hip hop evolved out of disco's bad rap. Yes, I said it again. So in summary, disco's emphasis on rhythm, community, and dance set the stage for hip hop's rise. By borrowing disco's tools, techniques, and party culture, hip hop transformed into a distinct genre and cultural movement that carried forward the energy of disco while addressing the unique struggles and stories of urban youth. Yeah, so since this is the second time that ChatGPT has mentioned Disco Demolition Night, I just want to talk about that real quick. So let me ask, what is Disco Demolition Night? And hear what it says. It says, Disco Demolition Night was a notorious promotional event that took place on July 12, 1979 at Comiskey Park in Chicago, Illinois. It is widely regarded as a symbolic moment marking the backlash against disco music and the genre's perceived cultural dominance. Here's what happened. The event, organized by Steve Dahl, a Chicago rock DJ, and Mike Veek, the promotions director for the Chicago White Sox. The purpose, the event was a promotional stunt to attract more fans to a baseball doubleheader between the Chicago White Sox and Detroit Tigers, as attendance had been declining. The plan, fans were invited to bring disco records to the stadium for destruction. During the break between the doubleheader games, the records would be blown up on the field in a dramatic show. Wow, there really was a backlash against disco. And I'm wondering if the whole LGBTQ stuff had anything to do with it. Yeah, and the whole, I don't know, maybe they felt disco was just negative. This was a disco ball of negativity, you know, which would help to explain hip hop's negativity. You know, the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. So it was that negativity in disco that formed the negativity that we experience with hip hop. So what happened? There was a massive turnout. Organizers expected about 20,000 fans, but over 50,000 people showed up, many of whom didn't care about baseball. They were there to destroy disco records and rebel against the genre. The explosion. During the intermission, a large crate of disco records was detonated in center field, creating a massive explosion and sending debris flying. Chaos ensued. After the explosion, a large number of fans stormed the field, causing a riot. The unruly crowd destroyed the field, burned disco records, and vandalized the stadium. Police had to intervene, and the second game of the doubleheader was forfeited because the field was too damaged to continue. Yeah, so that was crazy. People were really up in arms against disco, for them to really bring in disco records to blow them up. Like, they really wanted to make a statement. So disco went out with a bang, literally. Why it happened? Disco Demolition Night was fueled by several factors. Cultural backlash. By 1979, disco had become highly commercialized, dominating radio, clubs, and pop culture. Many fans of rock, punk, and other genres saw it as artificial and overbearing. Okay, interesting. Generational divide. Disco was associated with urban nightlife, LGBTQ plus communities, and Black and Latino culture, which some suburban, predominantly white rock fans rejected. Wow, so this was a culture war. This was a culture war, and I think disco lost that culture war. Anti-disco sentiment. Steve Dahl led an anti-disco campaign through his "Disco Sucks" slogan, capturing the frustration of rock fans who felt disco had overshadowed their music. Legacy. The end of disco's mainstream era. Disco Demolition Night is often cited as a symbolic death of disco. While the genre didn't disappear, its commercial dominance waned, and the music industry shifted toward rock, new wave, and hip-hop in the 1980s. Cultural criticism. Over time, the event has been criticized for underlying tones of racism, sexism, and homophobia, as disco was deeply rooted in Black, Latino, and LGBTQ communities. Yes, and since disco was deeply rooted in those communities, it would explain why hip-hop is deeply rooted in those communities. And, you know, I think that the fact that it's the LGBTQ plus communities, I think we can safely say that it was Black, Latinos, and I think, you know, given disco, I think white people and disco go together like, you know what I mean, bun and cheese. So, you know, white people are in the mix as well. Again, you can't go to a discotheque without, you know, white people's presence. They're a part of all of that. So let's say hip hop is a multicultural genre, like disco was. Impact on music. Despite the backlash, disco's influence lived on, shaping genres like house, techno, and hip hop, which drew heavily from disco's beats and grooves. In summary, Disco Demolition Night was more than just a wild publicity stunt. It reflected a cultural shift and backlash against disco's mainstream popularity. However, it also highlighted deeper social tensions surrounding race, gender, and sexuality in late 1970s America. Very, very interesting. I think we should have a hip-hop demolition night. Because hip-hop is, you know, I think hip-hop is arguably worse than disco in terms of the negativity and cultural degeneracy. Hip-hop is just disgusting at this point. And, you know, I think that we should, I think disco brought it in, and what brought out disco should also take out hip-hop. A demolition night. I think someone should look into that. Yes. So again, I think we found our culprit, ladies and gentlemen. I think hip hop clearly has its roots in disco music and disco culture. I think that is pretty obvious. And I think one of the things that made it kind of clear is just how many of the pioneers in hip hop have disco in their name. And I also asked ChatGPT to give us a list of people of hip hop pioneers that have the word disco in their name. And here's what it said. It says several hip hop pioneers incorporated the word disco into their names, reflecting the strong influence of disco culture on the early development of hip hop. Some of these pioneers include Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5. Okay. While not directly named after disco, obviously, Grandmaster Flash and his crew were heavily influenced by disco culture. Flash often performed at disco clubs and incorporated disco elements into his sets. Disco Wiz. Luis Disco Wiz Cedeno is considered the first Latino DJ in hip-hop. He teamed up with Grandmaster Caz and helped shape the early hip-hop DJ culture in the Bronx. Lovebug Starsky. Although disco isn't in his name, Lovebug Starsky, one of the early DJs credited with coining the term hip-hop, often played at disco-themed events and blended disco with hip-hop. DJ Disco King Mario. An influential DJ from the Bronx, Disco King Mario played a critical role in shaping hip-hop culture during its early days by organizing block parties and mentoring younger DJs. DJ Hollywood. Known for blending disco music with rap in the early 1970s, DJ Hollywood performed at many disco clubs and is often credited with pioneering the rhythmic style of rap that emerged from disco beats. These names highlight the intersection of disco and hip-hop during its formative years in the Bronx. Disco's beats, style, and party culture created the foundation for hip-hop's rise. Yes, I think that makes it very clear. That hip-hop's foundation is built around disco music. And so, like it or not, love it or not, hip-hop is rooted in disco. When we started, we said we were questioning the idea of, hip-hop being the father of all of these other subgenres of music that exist. Reggae, reggaeton, bunch of other, just today's modern music that hip-hop claims to be outgrowths of it. I think, what we also have seen today is that hip-hop itself is an outgrowth of disco. So, if we want to talk about the creators of hip-hop and who created hip-hop, we have to keep disco culture in mind. I think that the creators of hip-hop have a big claim in being the creators of disco, or wherever disco came from. I think that has to state a claim to hip-hop as well. Disco is one of the main pioneers of hip-hop culture, especially the culture, not just the music, the culture itself, everything about it, the dancing, the drugs, everything about the homosexuality, everything about disco transferred to hip-hop. So we see what is really going on here, and I think it's pretty obvious where hip-hop is coming from. There's no question, in my mind at least at this point, that everybody is influencing everyone. So hip-hop is not just giving birth to stuff, and black people are not just creating stuff, where black people are influenced and influence people. Hip-hop has been influenced and hip-hop influences. That's just how life works. So this should be interesting. Let's see where this takes us. We have a lot more questions to ask. So let's that's pretty much, I think this is a good place to stop with this first video. Again, it's our first video in the series, a history of hip hop. It is a history. And I think it's I think it's a good place to start. The next video in part 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about disco. We can't just have one video about the history of hip hop and just one video on disco. I think this is worth exploring some more. Wikipedia does say some more about disco and hip hop, so I think next video we want to dive into that a little bit more, see what questions come up, and then take it from there. Thank y'all for taking your time to watch this video. Hope you continue watching the series, and blessings to you. Again, thanks for being here, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Recognize royalty, recognize it, recognize royalty, gotta recognize it, recognize royalty, like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty. I can feel, recognize royalty, I can see, recognize royalty, now I recognize royalty, royalty, I can see, recognize royalty, I can love, recognize royalty, now I recognize it. Royalty, I recognize passion. Never just a man with the title in his hand, with the vital in his hand, with the Bible in his hand. Never just a man with the scepter and demand, with the lecture and the stand, with the vector and the candle. Can you understand the grand from the texture of the hand? Hard at work, are you hard at work, working with the man? Don't kiss the ring of royalty. Crown him king, just a thing, letting loyalty ring. Bring frankincense and myrrh and other things. It's gold already blings from the highest that prizes no sins. Recognize the king's overruling commandments with the Trinity and the power it brings. When you recognize royalty, I feel it. I can see it. Yeah, I see it. I recognize now. Royalty. I can see it. I see it. Now I'm in love now. I recognize your passion. Recognize royalty. Sunrise royally. Sitting on top of the world. I'm five morally. Status of a king for surely. Orally we pop them things till we stop the impurity. We pop them just for recognition. Listen to the missionary on a mission with the visionary vision. Do you recognize intuition? I reel in men when I went out fishing. I tell you why they rocked the boat. Cause they didn't understand what the prophet wrote. What's the conniption? Choose the Jews crucifixion and refuse recognition at son child's christening in the mix of some. Insist they fix the system from malarkey back to my monarchy. Yeah, back above me. Don't soil my purple and blue, and I will recognize your royalty too. I can feel you. I feel it. I can see it. I can see it. Now I recognize now. Your royalty. I can see it. I see it. I can love. And I'm in love now. I recognize your passion. Royalty.
Hey, peace, everyone. Thanks for being here. One idea,
Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. Gotta recognize it. Recognize royalty. Like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty.
I can feel.
Recognize royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
Now I recognize
royalty.
Royalty's eyes.
Royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
I can love.
Recognize royalty.
Now I
recognize it.
Royalty.
I recognize passion. Just the man with the title in his hand, with the vital in his hand, with the Bible in his hand. Yo, never just the man with the scepter and demand, with the lecture and the stand, with the vector and the candle. Can you understand the grand from the texture of the hand? Hard at work, are you hard at work? Working with the man, don't kiss the ring of royalty. Crown him king, just a thing, letting loyalty ring. Bring frankincense and myrrh and other things. It's gold already blings from the highest of prizes, no sins. Recognize the king's overruling commandments with the Trinity and the power it brings. When you recognize royalty, I feel it.
I can see.
Yeah, I see it. I recognize now.
Royalty's eyes.
Royalty.
I can see.
I see it.
I can love again.
Now I'm in love now. I recognize your passion.
Royalty.
Recognize royalty.
Yeah. So, once again, welcome. Part 2 of the saga, Who Created Hip Hop. Part 1 was Disco Fever. So today we're hailing disco because disco seems to be the heart of this hip hop thing. The first show we said hip hop was formerly known as disco rap, which means they were rapping over disco beats. Started in the streets. It goes along with the typical story we know of. It started in the streets, dancing, and 70s dancing is disco music. So disco does seem to be the foundation of the movement of the culture. They were just hip hop is just taking the disco stuff, scratching it, cutting the beats, breaking them. Break beating, if you will, if that's even a phrase. But it's all mainly messing with disco, and mainly disco. They played a lot of different genres of music, but because dancing was kind of the heart of the culture, disco was the main thing being played, if you will. So we said hip hop culture is a baby or a subculture of disco culture. And so we just want to talk some more today about disco and what disco really is. We're going to do the usual wiki, see what we can see, and let's see what it says. It says disco is a genre of dance music and a subculture that emerged in the late 1960s from the United States' urban nightlife scene. Its sound is typified by 4-on-the-floor beats, syncopated bass lines, string sections, brass and horns, electric piano, synthesizers, electric rhythm guitars. So it emerged as a subculture, as a genre and a subculture in the United States. But discotheques as a venue were mostly a French invention, imported to the United States with the opening of Le Club, a members-only restaurant and nightclub. So discotheques are from France. Oui. And I think discotheques are a major part of disco culture. So I think that may be another hint that the culture has more foundation in France. Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense. But yeah, at Le Club, a members only restaurant and nightclub located at 416 East 55th Street in Manhattan. Manhattan takes the cake when it comes to disco. Ain't that right though? Manhattan, that's the right borough, you know what I mean, for who created disco. It's so right. It's so proper. Manhattan gets disco, the Bronx gets hip hop. It's appropriate. I don't know. Um, Yeah, so disco music as a genre started as a mixture of music from venues popular among African Americans, Hispanic and Latino Americans, gay Americans, and Italian Americans in New York City, especially Brooklyn, in New York City and Philadelphia during the late 1960s to the mid to late 1970s. So it started as a genre amongst African Americans and Latinos, and that's important that it's a genre or a culture, because I think those DJs may have played those music so much that they had to kind of create a genre in and of itself. Like they made it a genre because they were just so into it. They kind of created a culture around it, which kind of, I think, made a genre out of it. Several dance styles were developed during the period of the 70s disco's popularity in the US, including the bump, the hustle, the Watergate, and the bus stop. Yeah, man, all of this just kind of seems to be making pretty natural sense here. Um, so from During the 1970s, disco music was developed further, mainly by artists from the United States, from Europe, well-known artists from the United States and Europe. Well-known artists included the Bee Gees, ABBA, Donna Summer, Gloria Gaynor, Giorgio Moroder. Y'all know the names: Barry White, Diana Ross, um, Earth, Wind, and Fire. While performers garnered public attention, record producers working behind the scenes played an important role in developing the genre. By the late 1970s, most major U.S. cities had thriving disco club scenes, and DJs would mix dance records at clubs such as Studio 54, venue popular among celebrities, um, nightclub goers often wore expensive, extravagant outfits consisting predominantly of loose, flowing pants or dresses for ease of movement while dancing. There was also a thriving drug subculture in the disco scene, a drug subculture, because when we did the first video, we spoke about hip hop being a movement, and what was that movement about. And now disco, I think, may also be a movement, because I think a lot of drug use started during that time. So I'm wondering if that same social movement was going on with disco. But that may be for a whole nother show. There was a thriving drug subculture in the disco scene, particularly for drugs that would enhance the experience of dancing to the loud music and flashing lights, such as cocaine and quaaludes, the latter being so common in disco subculture that they were nicknamed disco biscuits. Disco clubs were so associated with promiscuity as a reflection of the sexual revolution of this era in popular history. Wow. No, this has to be the birth of hip hop. Drugs and promiscuity. This is the birth of hip hop. We need look no more. Here it is here. Films such as Saturday Night Fever, Thank God It's Friday contributed to disco's mainstream popularity. This is crazy. Disco declined. This is crazy. Disco declined as a major trend in popular music in the United States following the infamous Disco Demolition Night on June 12, 1979, and it continued to sharply decline in popularity in the US during the early 1980s. However, it remained popular in Italy and some European countries throughout the 1980s, and during this time also started becoming trendy in places elsewhere, including the fact that it remained popular in Italy is kind of another hint that it kind of started over there. It's their music. But I think Europe is kind of taking claim to disco, and I think disco is definitely taking claim to hip hop. If we just take a look at the etymology of the term disco, it says the term disco is shorthand for the word discotheque, a French word for library of phonograph records derived from bibliothèque. The very word disco is a French word. It's a French word. The word discotheque had the same meaning in English in the 1950s. Discotheque became used in French for a type of nightclub in Paris after they had resorted to playing records during the Nazi occupation in the early 1940s. Wow. Yeah, looks like hip hop has a lot more than just disco to hail for the creation of hip hop. Am I right? It says disco was started as a way to kind of, I guess, cope with what was going on with the Nazi and the Nazi invasion or something like that. Isn't that something? Nazism is somehow at the core of hip hop. It is so appropriate. It is so appropriate. You know, that is actually very telling. That when you go down the rabbit's hole, you actually run into Nazism. Not that it's you know, disco was of Nazi people, but just that it's involved, even if it's just a way for people to cope with what was happening to them, and kind of it was their escape. So I'm not saying disco is tied to that. I'm just saying that Nazism is tied to disco. That's all I'm saying. Wow, but very interesting. So yeah, so man, it looks like disco is white people culture. Hip hop is white people culture with white people drugs and white people sexual promiscuity. You know what I mean? Black people didn't create the drugs in use, and they ain't create sexual promiscuity. I don't think it started with Black Americans. So, you know, it's slipping away from you kind of more and more every day. Yeah. So here we are, man. Here we are. I think this is our second seal that has been opened in terms of how far down the rabbit hole and where we end up. We ended up in Europe, in places that we may not have wanted to end up. But you know, it is what it is, man. It is what it is. So again, I hope y'all are enjoying this series. There's going to be more to come from this series. So I hope you're liking the video. I hope you subscribe. Please hit the notifications. You know, I may go live every now and then. I'm going to be going live to talk about the videos, and just see how you're feeling. Hopefully, you know, you'll come on and we can have conversations live about what's being said. So man, it's a pleasure to have started doing this. I'm so looking forward to going down the rabbit hole some more, and just continuing with the adventure. You know what I mean? But let's go. Blessings to everyone. Thanks again for being here.
Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. Gotta recognize it. Recognize royalty. Like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty.
I can feel.
Recognize royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
Now I recognize
royalty.
royalty inside.
Royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
I can love
Recognize
again.
royalty.
Now I
Recognize it.
royalty.
I recognize passion. Never just the man with the title in his hand, with the vital in his hand, with the Bible in his hand. Never just the man with the scepter in demand, with the lecture in the stand, with the vector and the candle. Can you understand the grand from the texture of the hand-hearted work. Are you hard at work, working with the man? It's the ring of royalty. Crown him king, just a thing, letting loyalty ring. Bring frankincense and myrrh and other things. It's gold already blings from the highest that prizes no sins. Recognize the kings, overruling commandments with the Trinity and the power it brings. When you recognize royalty, I feel it. Yeah, I see it. I recognize now. Royalty. I see it. Now I'm in love now. I recognize your passion. Recognize royalty. Sunrise royally. Sitting on top of the world. I'm five morally. Status of a king for surely. Orally we pop them things till we stop the impurity. We pop them just for recognition. Listen to the missionary on a mission with the visionary vision. Do you recognize intuition? I reel in men when I went out fishing. I'll tell you why they rocked the boat. Cause they didn't understand what the prophet wrote. What's the conniption? To choose the Jews' crucifixion and refuse recognition at son child's christening. In the mix, I'm in some. Insist they fix the system from malarkey back to my monarchy. Yeah, back above me. Don't soil my purple and blue, and I will recognize your royalty too.
I can feel you.
I feel it.
I can see you.
I can see it.
Now I recognize
now.
royalty's eyes.
It's your royalty.
I can see you.
I see it.
I can love again.
And I'm in love now.
Now
I recognize your passion.
royalty.
Royalty.
Hey, peace, everyone. Thanks for being here. On our deal it.
Recognize royalty. Recognize it. Recognize royalty. Gotta recognize it. Recognize royalty. Like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. 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 Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. I recognize it. I recognize the passion. Never just the man with the title in his hand, with the vital in his hand, with the Bible in his hand. Yo, never just the man with the scepter and demand, with the lecture and the stand, with the vector and the candle. Can you understand the grand from the texture of the hand? Hard at work, are you hard at work, working with the man? It's the ring of royalty. Crown him king, just a thing, letting loyalty ring. Bring frankincense and myrrh and other things. It's gold already blings from the highest that prizes no sins. Recognize the kings, overruling commandments with the Trinity and the power it brings. When you recognize royalty, I feel it. Yeah, I see it. I recognize now. Royalty. I see it. Now I'm in love now. I recognize your passion. Recognize royalty.
Yeah, all right. So welcome to episode 3. We're back at it. We're hailing disco today. I'm sorry. Yesterday, the last episode was hailing disco. Today we are actually partying with the black spades. Today we're partying with the spades. Last show, when the reason we held disco is because we learned that disco is short for discotheque, which is a French word. Disco is actually a French word, and in the debate of who owns disco, at least. I think we're trying to make the argument that disco is white people stuff as well, and I think the fact that it's a French word, you know what I mean, is strong evidence, and the fact that also discotheques started in France, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere in Europe. And we said discotheques are, in my estimation, absolutely the foreshadowing of street parties. You know what I mean? We said street parties are just the disco parties after they left the techs, the discotheques. Um, yeah. So there are strong arguments for us to say disco is white people stuff. It remained popular in Europe after it died down in the States. Another hint that it's their stuff, because they held on to it. Um, we also learned from the last episode when we hailed disco. Part of the reason we hailed disco also was because we realized that it started out as an escape to the doom and gloom of what was going on in Europe at the time with a lot of with the Nazi stuff. And so it was seen as, the dancing was seen as an escape to that. So we hailed disco, not the other guy. So today we want to talk about the street party culture that evolved from the discotheques, which we call hippity hop culture. It's only an evolution of the discotheques. I think we've learned that the gangs kind of took over the street parties by kind of closing down discotheques, if you will. Got the people outside. Gang activity, gang. They kind of terrorized discotheques. They literally did, and then after that, they started having street parties. Isn't that something? That kind of is interesting. So we're gonna have a street party with the black spades today. We're gonna learn about the black spades, and how disco kind of went with hip hop. Disco went to the left, they went to the left to street party with the spades. Did y'all get that bar? They went to the left to party with the spades. They went to the left to party with, to the left, the left wing party. I think that's something that we're gonna learn about as well. Yeah, and that is another bar. I got bars. Disco Fever gave me sick hip hop bars, if you remember. So I got bars. Y'all can at least stay for the bars at least. But let's leave the bar and go to the party with the spades. Look, I did it again. Leave the bar, go to the party with the spades. Leave the bar, go to the part. That's another one. I'm too good. But seriously, let's see what we can learn from our good friend Wikipedia. You know what I mean? Yeah. Let's do the wiki and see what we can see. Yeah, so it says the Black Spades were a mostly African American street gang, which started in the Bronx during the late 1960s and gained popularity in the 70s. The gang began to spread from the Bronx to Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, New Rochelle, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut by the late 1980s. During this period, Latino and white members were more common. The Black Spades, during this period, Latino and white members were more common. The Black Spades have made a comeback in 2019 with more members joining. They are now TBS New Direction, a community service group championing anti-violence initiatives and providing food distribution for the food insecure. Yeah, that's interesting. I've noticed, even with the idea of gangs, terrorizing discotheques and then having the people leave the discotheques and then having parties outside. That's kind of interesting. It's the same way, like with the idea that they're now a new organization that's championing anti-violence. That's kind of interesting that they morph into groups. They kind of start street wars and then morph into a group that fights against street wars. You know what I mean? They terrorize, they get the people out of the discotheques, then throw parties outside. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, that's interesting. It's like they steal your phone, then help you look for it. Yeah, that's crazy. That's interesting though. But anyway, let's continue reading and see what else we can learn about the Black Spades. Yeah, so a little more history about the Black Spades. The gang originated in 1968 in the Bronx Dale houses in the Soundview section of the Bronx. Although rumor says they were originally named the Savage Seven, the name from the start was the Black Spades. The Black Spades officially formed in Junior High School 123 on Morrison Avenue in Soundview, originally a teenage street organization. The Spades followed the teachings of the 5% Nation, Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, and were influenced by the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground organization. That's interesting. Under the leadership of the original president, David Brockington, who was a member of the Nation of Islam, the Spades organized to fight against the racism and bigotry in the Soundview, Glasson Point, Parkchester, Castle Hill, and Throgs Neck neighborhoods of the Bronx. The 1st Division Black Spades policed and protected Bronxdale houses from the rise in crime, drug dealers, and heroin addicts who began to take over the community. I guess this is kind of all making a little more sense to me now, because they said they started in a junior high school, right? So these were teenagers, and so just the idea of them organizing to fight racism in their neighborhood just seemed like a lot for teenagers to be doing. It just seemed as if they were formed. Now it's kind of clear that the Black Spades was a larger organization. They were a larger organization, and they had a division of, I guess, younger children, and so that's kind of how it all. So they were formed for a specific reason. These were 13-year-old kids, so it sounds as if they were being recruited to join the gangs for a very specific reason. And when you hear about who they're following, like people like the 5% Nation, Malcolm X, NOI, you can see that there sounds to be it's not just kids, it's grown-ups involved in this whole scheme, if you will. And that's interesting. So they are in gangs. These are kids that are in gangs. So these are badass kids, But then they are in gangs that are organized to fight racism and bigotry. So, you know, they're good ass, badass kids. Um, you know, it's kind of weird. It's kind of interesting, and it's very interesting, but it's also kind of strange, you know. Um, yeah, but let's continue reading just a little bit more. But again, it seems as if the hippity hoppers are just a front for something bigger, social movement bigger than them. And the hippity hoppers, I'm talking about those 13-year-old kids that were just doing their thing, you know what I mean, with the nursery rhymes, we're at the street parties, you know, doing their thing to the disco, I presume, rapping to the disco, if you will. But yeah, so that's where we are at this point. So let's just continue reading just a little bit. Let me just find where I am. All right. The gang quickly spread to nearby housing projects in the Soundview area, Monroe houses, Soundview houses, Bronx River houses, Bronx River, and throughout the Bronx, starting a subculture inviting music into the lives of gang members. The Black Spades were also participants in the Hoe Avenue peace meeting. Even that peace meeting, the fact of 13-year-old kids being involved in a Hoe Avenue peace meeting, which was, you know, a big deal in the city at the time. A lot of people were there, a lot of politicians were there, the police were there. You know, that's a big deal. So now it kind of makes sense that they are just a division, and if not a division, kind of like just kind of a subgroup within a larger organization. They seem to, right. They're the baby spades. You got the Black Spades, you got the baby spades. I think they may have had junior spades. So they're just one level. And I think the whole organization is in charge of that social movement for what hip hop is about. And you know, whatever their role is, it's centered around hip hop culture. And their role that's where their role seems to be kind of centered. Yeah. So let's just hear what else is written here. The Black Spades also included a women's division that started in the Glassing Point Housing and Junior High School IS 131. That's crazy. They were a women's division that started in the junior high school. Now, were there adults in these junior high schools recruiting? That's just so crazy. That's just interesting. But anyway, by the early 1970s, the Black Spades had increased in numbers, and members began to lose focus of their original purpose. The Black Spades and young spades and baby spades became violent, and other divisions were unrestrained. David Brockington didn't like the direction that they were headed, so he stepped down as First Division president. Afterwards, Monk became the new supreme president of the Black Spades, which became a full-fledged street gang. New York street gang activity peaked in 1973 and then began to decline. Reasons for this decline included violence and drug use, as well as a move to the burgeoning hip-hop culture in park jams, block parties, and clubs. That's all interesting. You know, but let's continue to read. I don't think we've read anything that's of interest at this point. But wait, maybe this will be. Africa Bambaataa was a member in a Black Spade First Division First Chapter, then joined the Bronx River Houses Black Spades 10th Division before becoming a famous hip-hop DJ. He went on to form the Universal Zulu Nation on November 12, 1973, with several members following him. You know, I told y'all these were some badass baby kids, right? Like these the kids that started it, since these are the gang member kids, these are baby kids, and it looked like Bambata is baby. Like that's pretty much what this is. Um, you know, hippity hoppers, that are claiming hip hop are claiming Bambata as their father. Because it sounds as if, Africa Bambata is behind the whole, recruiting these kids as part of that gang. You know what I'm saying? And doing what he's doing. Africa Bambata is your father. He's the father of hip hop, if you ask me. You know what I'm saying? And you can have him. You can have him as your father. Let's hope it works out better for you than for them other kids. Allegedly. Um, but yeah, but y'all are children of Africa Bambata and the Zulu nation. That's who the hippity hoppers are. Um, that's who y'all are. Um, but let's read a little more. There's Cool DJ Herc. Yes, the Jamaican brethren. Bo. I used stop. No, let me stop. Let's see. Cool DJ Herc, an early hip hop music pioneer. So this is referring to Kool Herc as a pioneer. You know what I mean? And that's good because you know what I mean. He didn't create hip hop. Nope. That's all Bambata. Bebe created hip hop for his kids. So it's not Kool Herc. So it says Kool Herc, an early hip hop music pioneer, credits gangs including the Black Spades with getting the hip hop scene started. Gangs including the Black Spades, and you know what I mean. The Black Spades looks like Bambata was running the Black Spades. Bambata is your father. Bambata and the Zulu nation. You know what I mean? That's who created hip hop. Africa Bambata and the Zulu nation created hip hop. You know what I mean? Excuse me, let me switch that. They took white people's music and switched it up and created hip hop. You know what I'm saying? But it's still white people stuff. The same way they took white people's music and mixed it and scratched it and break it or break beat it. The same way they just take people's music and do what they want with it is the same way they took white people's culture, disco culture. They took disco culture and remixed it and scratched it and broke it. You know what I mean? And created hip hop culture. But that's all it is. It's just remixed disco culture. But it's white people culture nonetheless. It's the gang version of white people culture. But it says Kool Herc credits the Black Spades with getting the hip hop scene started. It started coming together as the gangs terrorizing a lot of discotheques back in the days. Man, exactly. They were terrorizing the discotheques. Makes sense. They were, you know what I mean? And I think that made people not want to go to the discotheques. And if you don't go to the discotheque, you gotta party outside, maybe go to the street parties. I mean, it sounds like a plan with these gangs, man. It always sounds like a plan. They terrorize the discotheques, get them out of the tech so they can have street parties. And it's the same thing they do with even the street wars. They create street wars, and then after that they create anti-violence movements against street wars. Like, I don't know. It sounds like a scam to me, but whatever. What do I know? Again, it says it started coming together as the gangs terrorizing a lot of known discotheques back in the days. I had respect for some of the gang members because they used to go to school with me. They were the Savage Skulls, Glory Stompers, Blue Diamonds, Black Cats, and Black Spades. Yeah, so it doesn't look like Kool Herc was one of them gangbangers. You know what I mean? Us Jamaicans, we don't be gangbanging. We don't be down with that stuff. I mean, well, okay, I'll take that back. But Kool Herc didn't mess with that stuff. He just hung out with y'all. He just hung out with y'all and brought his stuff and threw parties with y'all. But that was it. That's all. That's all we had to do with it. We don't want no more than that. All right. The organization had a strong following through the late 1990s. Around this time, many young members of the organization transitioned their membership to the Blood Street Gang in NYC. The Bloods. So the Bloods are East Coast and the Crips are West Coast. Like, you know what I mean? You can't have hip hop history without and a history about gangs without mentioning the Bloods and Crips. Bloods ran the East Coast as far as, and then the Crips are West Coast. I wonder if that has anything to do with the social movement. Maybe I'm thinking too much. What y'all think? Maybe? Who knows? So, you know, and I think also that maybe, again, I think that's probably the main reason why it's so hard to get rid of the N-word, is because, you know, the N-word belongs to hip hop culture and hip hop culture belongs to the gangs. You know, you're not going to get rid of the N-word because you're not going to get rid of the gangs. And I don't know if our community is ready to get rid of gang culture yet. We are too invested in the gang. We are gang. You know what I mean? We love everything gang. The Black community loves that. You know what I mean? And that's not just African Americans, that's Jamaicans, that's Puerto Ricans. For some reason, I don't know if it's an inner city thing, but it's gang. It's West Coast, East Coast. Our community is really engulfed in gang culture. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything else of interest. In early 2022, a resurgence of Black Spades members have risen in the River Park Towers housing complex of the West Bronx. This latest incarnation of the Black Spades are a neighborhood self-policing unit that has plans to participate in homeless food drives, after-school programs at CIS 229, and other positive neighborhood development. Yeah, so, you know, again, you know, they always seem to morph into positive neighborhood stuff after creating a lot of negative neighborhood stuff. But I don't know. That's another topic for another show. But yeah, just to summarize, for my hippity hoppers out there, the baby spades are just one division of or one level of the Black Spades. So they're just really, you know, they're just really children with, you know, they're pawns, if you will, in whatever the social movement of hip hop was and really is. This is a movement centered around gang culture. It's centered around drug culture, and it's centered around sexual promiscuity. And that's what, you know, that's what disco culture was as well. Disco culture was the drug culture and the sex promiscuity. What hip hop added was just the gang culture to it. There it is. Disco is drugs and sexual promiscuity, and hip hop is just gang activity added to that. That is what is added to disco to make it hip hop. You know, so you didn't really add music. If anything, you added gang culture to what was going on, or gang activity to the whole movement. So gang activity, drugs, promiscuity, which, you know, right now, P. Diddy is the poster boy for. You know, P. Diddy is hip hop. Yeah, and the history of hippity hop is the history of Africa Bambata and the Zulu nation. That's really, what it is. And so another question is what were they about? What was going on with Bambata and the Zulu nation, and the whole, just everything else. What else were they involved with in terms of the movement with creating hip hop? And we may go there next, in terms of what direction we take for this rabbit hole, as we go down in the rabbit hole and see where it takes us. Yeah. So I think we've touched on everything. Nothing else left to say at this point, other than, look out for part 4, man. Part 4 is coming. Part 4 is coming. So, you don't want to miss it. Hit the like button, please. May I beg you, hit the like button. And the subscribe. Hit subscribe right after you hit the like button. You know what I mean? And then the notification, like, it don't cost nothing. Hit the notification bell as well. It can only help. And then join my Discord server. Join the Discord server. It's the link is in the description of the video. Join the server. You get to interact with me all day. Ain't that something? Don't get no better than that. You know what I mean? Shout out to Sunchild. Sunchild is one of the main ones that is brave enough to interact with me in the Discord. So, it's me and Sunchild. Y'all can come hang out with me and Sunchild. How amazing is that? 2 for 1. You know what I mean? So join the Discord. It's a lot of fun. We get to talk all day, every day, which is amazing. I think that's all. I think that's enough to ask of people. Did I mention Twitter? I mean X. Join my X at American Dream Guy. I'm on X, American Dream Guy. Follow me. You know what I mean? Follow me, no man. Sure. Yeah, I think that's it now. That's it. There can't be more. No, the last thing. Y'all see the Cash App, right? The Cash App is right there. American Dream is alive. But you know what I mean? You gotta help keep the dream alive. Teamwork makes the dream work. Yeah, that's another bar. Teamwork makes the dream work. Yeah, man. Word up. American Dream is alive. Hit the Cash App. That's what's up. It would be highly appreciated. You know what I mean? Word up. Y'all are the best for being here, man. It's amazing to to be doing this. So once again, catch y'all on the next one. Until next time, peace out.
Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. Gotta recognize royalty. Like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty.
I can feel.
Recognize royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
Now I recognize
Royalty.
royalty inside.
Royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
I can love
Recognize
again.
royalty.
Now I recognize
I recognize it.
royalty.
I recognize passion. Never just the man with the title in his hand, with the vital in his hand, with the Bible in his hand. Yo, never just the man with the scepter in demand, with the lecture in the stand, with the vector and the candle. Can you understand the grand? From the texture of the hand, hard at work. Are you hard at work, working with the man? It's the ring of royalty. Crown him king, just a thing, letting loyalty ring. Bring frankincense and myrrh and other things. It's gold already blings from the highest that prizes no sins. Recognize the king's overruling commandments with the Trinity and the power it brings. When you recognize royalty, I feel it.
I can see.
Yeah, I see it.
Now I recognize
recognize now. Royalty.
I can see you.
I see it.
I can love again.
Now I'm in love now. I recognize your passion.
Royalty.
Recognize royalty, sunrise royally. Sitting on top of the world, I'm five morally. Status of a king for surely. Morally, we pop dumb things till we stop the impurity. We pop them just for recognition. Listen to the missionary on a mission with the visionary vision. Do you recognize intuition? I reel in men when I went out fishing. I'll tell you why they rocked the boat. Cause they didn't understand what the prophet wrote. What's the conniption? Choose the Jews' crucifixion and refuse recognition at son child's christening in the mix of some. Insist they fix the system from malarkey back to my monarchy. Yeah, back above me. Don't soil my purple and blue, and I will recognize your royalty too.
I can feel you.
Feel it.
I can see you.
I can see it.
Now
I recognize now.
Royal to these eyes.
Your royalty.
I can see you.
I see it.
I can love again.
And I'm in love now.
Now
I recognize your passion.
royalty.
Royalty.